Good to be with you, Todd.
All right, you were listening in. I saw you there, taking notes and keeping track. What did you make of it?
Absolutely as predicted and as billed between Carney and Poilievre. I do sense, because I've known Poilievre for the better part of 20 years, and I sat in front of him for many, many years in the House. He can be actually quite a bit more snide than that, and I think he was holding back a little bit. The advice that he seems to have gotten from many quarters, which is make your point, but you don't have to keep drilling it in. You don't have to keep needling your adversary. I think he's taking some of that to heart. Carney, good. On some questions, very good. He seemed to get caught off guard by the very short time frame that you have to put together your answer a few times. So that's going to come with experience. But overall, again, he's got an easy smile. He doesn't take this stuff too personally. And he had several announcements that he wanted to keep re-insisting on. Notably, of course, the announcement that came out over the weekend on housing. It's interesting to see some of the old pros in there. Even though he's new to the House of Commons, Gregor Robertson is a very experienced politician, and boy, does it show when he stands up to give his answers. Everything is compact. Everything's prepared in advance. He knows exactly where he's going. Of course, the same thing with Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne. So a very interesting question period. We have seen tougher over the years, and I think that everybody's trying to get used to each other and get the measure of their adversary. And there'll be lots more sparks, of course, as the days and weeks roll on.
Yeah, just for people watching across the country, you may not be familiar. Gregor Robertson, longtime mayor of Vancouver, so people outside of BC might not know who he is, but now, a prominent member of Team Carney in Ottawa.
And a very effective player in question period, as we just saw.
Yeah, as we did. Okay, so what do you think Mark Carney needs to do now in the initial days and weeks here as we get closer and closer to a budget? We know a lot of Canadians think that he's got what it takes on the economy. Others are skeptical, and it certainly seems like the Conservatives will really be pushing him, Tom, on that, saying, look, you promised to deal with the trade war. Here we are still in a trade war. You promised to get these tariffs lifted. Here we are still dealing with tariffs, and on it goes.
Yeah, in one of his answers to the Bloc, Carney was very clear. We've got a much better deal than almost all of the other trading partners with the Americans, and that is objectively the case. So I do think that a good faith analysis always shows that there is a fair bit of progress compared to a lot of our trading partners and the U.S. trading partners. At the same time, the budget is going to be a huge problem, but don't forget, who was the Prime Minister of Canada at the beginning of 2025? Oh, that Trudeau fellow. So they'll bring in a budget probably in November, and they'll say, well, we're sort of mopping up after the Trudeau era. Our first budget will be next year, and then you'll see things will be getting better. I think that's why there's been some leaking of information around the budget, which is usually verboten. You're supposed to be quite careful about what you leak around the budget. But senior people have been leaking to senior journalists the fact that the deficit for this next budget will actually be double what had been predicted. So we were looking at the 45 billion range. Now we're looking at maybe it's something closer to 100 billion. Now that's probably on the high side. If it comes in at 78 billion, well, then Carney and his Liberals would get to say, well, it's not as bad as it could have been because we took all these steps to be austere and to cut back on the size of government. That's something that they're learning to be careful on. Over the weekend, Steve McKinnon, their House leader, very experienced politician whose riding is in the Ottawa area, went quite far in hinting that they would actually be cutting jobs in the civil service. That's a battle they don't want to have with the civil service unions. Carney, the same day, was out there correcting that a touch, saying, no, this is through attrition. There's the tail end of the baby boom will be leaving the civil service in large numbers, and we won't have to start firing people. So that was a message that I think should have been better prepared in advance, and it shows that there's still a little bit of practicing required on the Liberal side in terms of messaging.
Let's show the party standings, Tom, just for people across the country who may not remember. The Liberals, of course, do not have a majority, but they're oh so close, just by a couple of seats. The Conservatives at 144, the Bloc at 22, the NDP only at 7, and Elizabeth May there from Saanich Gulf Islands with 1 seat for the Green Party. You talked about Trudeau, so let me ask you, we are seeing Mark Carney really trying to move the Liberal Party to the right in certain ways, trying to appeal to those so-called blue Liberals or red Tories, the voters in the centre that help to decide Canadian elections, certainly much more so than we saw under Justin Trudeau.
Absolutely. And he's moving away from that part of Trudeau's legacy, which was to always flash left anyway, even though very often he would turn right. But it's very tricky for Mark Carney because this is where he is. This is what he believes. He thinks that there's too much government and too much red tape and too much bureaucracy. But a lot of what he's taking away are guarantees for future generations. It's the sustainable development angle. It's the environment. So you say you're taking away the obligation to have more zero emission vehicles. You're taking away the consumer-facing carbon tax that would have been a guarantee to lower greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. And over the weekend, Tim Hodgson, his energy minister, is saying, well, we're talking about perhaps removing the caps on emissions from the oil sands. So those are just some of the examples on the environment. So this is an area where caucus is extremely sensitive because they know that they are liberals and that they've been elected by other liberals, and they think that protection of the environment and care about sustainable development are core values for them. And Mr. Carney has got to remember that he is the leader of the Liberal Party. No matter what his reflexes or those of Mr. Hodgson, he's got to remember that, because we saw last week the formation of, within caucus, a group of concerned Liberal MPs saying we're going to have a caucus group that discusses the environment. And that's a very subtle warning to their leader that he better not go too far in dismantling environmental and protections and guarantees for future generations.